I already did it. Matt told me not to forget that I was on mute, and I already did it once. Good to see you all. Happy to be moderating. Shelby did a nice introduction of me. My name's Kari or Kari, pronouns she, hers, and I'm the in-house coach at BenchSci, and I'm really excited to be moderating this panel. And I'll do a brief introduction of our panelists, and then I'll pass it to each of them to do a little bit of a longer form introduction so that we get to hear it from each of you, what it is that you'd like us to know about you today. So on the panel, we have Prasanna, who's a senior lead of diversity and belonging at Shopify. We also have Amanda, who owns the Workaround and will tell us more about her story, and as well as Terri, who's the CEO of iHealthOx. Or OX, sorry. I will pass it to each of you to give just a sort of brief introduction to your story and tell us about who you are. And we can go in the order that I introduced you all.
Hello, everyone. My name is Prasanna. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm a senior lead of diversity and belonging at Shopify. I've worked in the DEIB space for about the past 15 years in the legal profession, judicial appointments, the entertainment industry, and now in tech. I also am a member of many underrepresented communities. I'm a member of a racialized community. I'm a person with a disability. I'm legally blind with a degenerative eye condition, and I'm a member of the LGBTQ2+ community. So those intersectional identities inform how I approach my work every day and also inform how I be and become who I am in the world and in the workplace. So I'm really thrilled to be here.
Thanks, Prasanna. All right, go ahead, Amanda.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda Munday, and I own the Workaround, which is a co-working space with childcare on site in East Toronto. I'm a queer mother of 2 kids who are 7 and 4, and thankfully in school, not at home right now, which is a wonderful life. I started the Workaround in 2018 after 2 rough maternity leaves. The first, I had severe postpartum depression that landed me involuntarily committed to Mount Sinai's psychiatric ward with postpartum depression. And it was actually my return to work that I found rougher than that. And after my second child and trying to return to tech and working in marketing capacity for a tech startup, I knew that tech in particular, but a lot of workplaces are not supportive of parents, and we need something far more accessible, affordable, and just much easier. So I built a physical space that allows parents to breathe. Nice to meet everyone.
Hi guys, and thank you, Amanda, that was awesome. I'm Terri Storey. I'm the CEO of iHealthOx, which is a well-being and mental health platform. I've been in this space for 20 years, delivering mental health services, working with psychiatrists and people trying to, breaking down the barriers to get access, giving people resiliency, tools, that kind of stuff. About 7 years ago, I launched my first tech product called Snap Clarity. It wasn't called Snap Clarity then, which again was a platform that people could seek out, do a mental health assessment on their own, and then they could connect to a therapist. We end up selling that company last year, and it was a journey going through that as a tech founder woman, mental health and startup, working with people with mental health, and then changing it from bricks and mortar to a virtual platform. So anyways, I went back to my grassroots last year when we actually sold Snap. I didn't want to continue on that path. I went back down to my original business, that is a bricks and mortar mental health. And I felt that I really needed to look at a different model for people that was sustainable, gave different kind of options to people, different care modalities around that was affordable, scalable, and high quality. And work with partners. So I kind of built a different product with iHealthOx just because I felt that it needed to be different with telemedicine. So that's kind of my story in 20 years and where I am today, and kind of like very happy to be in the tech space. It's quite a journey, and yeah, so I'm thrilled to be here.
Thank you all for introducing yourselves. Before we hop into some questions, we'll do about 35-40 minutes of questions. There will be also a question and answer time at the end. So if you do have a question, you can go to slido.com and type in the code 235246. And from there, you'll be able to add questions and upvote ones that you would like to be addressed at the end of our talk today. We'll be sharing that Slido information again on the screen. I'll also read it out. It's also in the chat near the end as we move into the questions, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can. But I'd like to get started with some questions for each of the panelists. And Prasanna, am I saying your name correctly? I made a note and then I forgot again.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, Prasanna, like press a button.
Awesome, Prasanna. So throughout your career, you've worked in a variety of industries. You started in the legal world, in the entertainment industry. And I'm wondering, how does the tech industry compare in terms of how accessibility and accommodations are handled within the employee experience? And what's kept you here over the last several years?
That's a great question, a deep question to start off with. I always appreciate the fact that I have comparative experience across a range of different industries to assess what's working and what could work better. And I think for me, what I've discovered throughout my journey is that in the legal profession, there's a lot of really beautiful reports that explore the importance of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and accessibility. They're well researched. They have a 5-year strategic plan. There's like resourcing put towards the promotion of that plan and awareness building around it. And sometimes you would look around and see what has fundamentally changed. And in many cases, there's a beautiful glossy report, but there's not actions that emanate from it that show a discernible change in the workplace. Entertainment was similar. I continue to work in that space, but it also has the notion of raising conversations about these topics in many ways. And then very few organizations actually see if progress has been made around accessibility. I think the one thing I appreciate about tech and what drew me to it after being a lawyer for 13 years was there was a willingness to acknowledge that there was still work to be done when it came to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and especially accessibility. But it was exciting in that tech was the institution or the industry that was designing the future of how we worked, designing the future of how we operated as a society. So they really could imagine what the future looked like, and they had the power within their hands to design a future that was accessible. So for me, it was exciting to come to a place where people were self-aware about doing this work and had the capability to make a change. Now, every day working in this space, there are challenges that I face as someone who has a disability. And I continue to navigate what are the ways in which I can make progress in the tech industry. And the one thing I deeply appreciate is the willingness to have these conversations. So I'm taking that as an opening point to hopefully more meaningful change in the future.
Thank you. Beautiful answer. Terri, I'd like to ask you a question next, if that's okay. So iHealthOx is your third product focusing on mental health. And I'm wondering or curious, what do you think is one of the biggest gaps in terms of mental health support? And how can companies and technologies play a role in fixing it?
Again, a great question. And I loved it because I think, I've been in this space 20 years and I've also been in the space of technology, right? Which I think is one way of how we can support people. But if I really look at, there's many challenges in mental health care. And I think one of the biggest ones for me is that the supply and demand issue. Right now, I think one of the biggest threats to our nation is mental wellness, right? And we don't have enough psychotherapists to actually manage that, right? And so, what happens today is what happens in supply and demand is that the people who can pay for it get the high quality therapist, right? And so are people dealing with that stuff, right? And then we have people who may need it the most not getting it at all, right? So I think this is where we see this misallocation of human resources, right? And we see that, and it goes right down to what employers are offering or what people are offering. It's just a supply and demand. And so, and to explain this further for me, when I went back to kind of what I was building this time was to kind of look at, there's this difference between a clinical need and a subclinical need. So we can have people, for instance, right, that have depression, anxiety, kind of stuff that actually psychotherapists are trained to deal with, right? Clinical need. And we have people with a subclinical need, what might be anxiety and stress, because people have ebbs and flows through their life, right? Could use a coach. So for us, it was really important looking for sustainable methods using potentially coaching, right? Where people could use a coach that's way less expensive. And then when you have a clinical need, anybody, then we have therapists available, right? So using validated assessments, understanding where people kind of sit in that spectrum and saying, okay, you need a psychotherapist, yes, for a few sessions, then you can go back to level 2 for coaching and that kind of stuff. If you come in, you may use your coaching and then again, get in a crisis, use psychotherapist. So we're really trying to look at this equality, that people that who need clinical therapy get it when they need it. And then people that, can live in, self-care apps or digital stuff, and then support from a care coach, which is more sustainable and scalable. So I think, again, if that explains, the biggest issues we're trying to accomplish is that inequity of supply and demand, and who can pay and who can't pay.
And Terri, just a quick follow-up on that. I think you and me could probably talk for 10 hours about that. But I'm specifically interested in how can companies and technologies, think about, and so I'm thinking about how you're thinking about solving this from a technological standpoint. How can people think about creating that accessibility, say within a company or within a community of people?
Totally. And that's awesome. And I work with lots of companies trying to figure, work through this with them. I think it's really starting out, trying to evaluate what you have, and then just giving your people a voice. Like, what do you need? And I know, and I worked very closely, and it's great, Shopify here, is that, when we sent out surveys, the number one thing people were like, mental health, right? We need mental health resources. People know it, they put on the table. And so it's like looking like, do we have a product? Because there's so many out there. Does it meet the diverse needs of my, population? Does it actually include, diverse therapy, right? Does it, have an expanded network? Does it offer coaching, self-care apps, right? And really looking at, I think a lot of employers think, oh, I have an EAP program that meets the checkbox. And it doesn't, right? It doesn't work. And so it's like, and I think it's taking the time to understand what your solution is and how does it serve my people, right?
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Amanda, I'd like to ask you a question. The Workaround is a parent-friendly workspace, and you also your company is described as one of the most innovative businesses in Toronto, which is awesome. What led you to create this workplace in particular, and what have you seen this unlock for your team members?
Yeah, well, I gave a bit of my story in the introduction. In short, I created the Workaround for me because I was annoyed and I am stubborn, and I just couldn't believe that there were more coffee shops and Starbucks than there are daycares in an urban city like Toronto. And when I started to go down the path of like, well, why are there not so many daycares? Why is this so hard? How can daycare be $2,000 a month? How can it be that I'm, in marketing in a senior level role, and it's going to cost me close to $50,000 a year to have my 2 kids under 2 in childcare? I'm going to quit. I'm going to leave the workforce. And that will forever impact my earning potential. It is at the heart, not entirely, but certainly a component of pay equity issues. And it's so very solvable. Why can't we create more daycares? Why are they inflexible? But also, there was something that happened to me in the shift from professional to parent and in and out of that world. I would describe myself as, A-type, ambitious, career-driven, excited about my work. I was leading a conference call the day I gave birth, and excited about it, right? I didn't put an out of office on. I wasn't sure what my parental leave would look like. I wasn't sure what support I would have at home. I knew my job was a key component to my identity. And when I was in the psych ward, where I stayed for 18 days, but then also, post care outside of the psychiatric ward, dealing with postpartum depression, I thought work was done. How will I go back to work? How will I be that ambitious? How will I put work first when now not only am I taking care of this little human, but also I have to recover from my own mental health crisis, and I'm weaning on meds, and that's a whole thing. And, and I felt a ton of shame in telling anybody that all of this was happening. So to me, the Workaround solves the childcare problem in that, You can buy a day pass for $85 a day. You can pick one day, you can pick 5 days, you can change as your schedule changes. It often serves entrepreneurs and remote workers and contract workers who don't necessarily need 9 to 5 Monday to Friday care to commit a year up front, and it won't cost you $2,000 to come here. But more importantly, the Workaround has unlocked people to bring their whole selves to work and to not have to hide their parental identity with their professional identity. You can come here and be so excited about a work milestone and be completely relieved that your kid is dropped off and well cared for. And also, we have space for you to cry and totally break down, because the separation anxiety as you drop your kid off becomes insurmountable. Like all are true, right? Our parental identities and our work identities happen at the same time. And so a bit of a long answer, but for me, the Workaround has been so much about honoring all of the ways that we show up at work. In my case, this space supports parents, but not only parents, certainly not only mothers or those identifying as mothers. It's really important to me that, you know, the Workaround doesn't get called a space for moms, although people try, that it's everybody shows up here, right? Because that's how we work well.
Yeah, thank you, Amanda. I love that you're saying bringing your whole self to work, and I feel like we're all kind of talking around that for others, especially how do we enable everyone to bring their whole selves to work. And I'm getting a little bit curious about how do you all navigate that, and what are some of the challenges that you've experienced? And so Terri, I'd like to start with you. Curious about what are some of the unexpected challenges that you've experienced in navigating your career and building companies as it relates to your own mental health? How do you make sure you're taking care of yourself first?
I kind of laugh when I say that, because being an entrepreneur, especially a tech entrepreneur, right? There was a difference around, can you find life balance? So I'll answer that one in a minute. I think the very first thing is what people say is, you know, I try to live by my purpose and I try to live my authentic self always. It's not always great, but I'm just saying I try to. And if I'm not on that path, I know it. I call it like, I'm like streaming, I'm like paddling upstream. If I feel like I'm starting to paddle upstream, I need to listen to what's not happening, right? It doesn't feel right. And I think prior, right, to some things I've learned in self-development was that I'd probably let the challenging upstream go a lot longer than I would have before, right? And before I take action. And so kind of answer your question about life balance, I think is probably the most important. And as I've been an entrepreneur, I think that we all go through this and we actually feel like we have to impress other people. We start to like, you know, get off our path and we start to like, you know, feel like we have to do more, sell more, meet these expectations, get to here to meet investors. So I really feel it's like you're doing that for other people, right? Not so much for yourself, or there's these kind of timelines placed on you. So I feel that's where this kind of crowded place comes in between life balance and finding it, right? So I think that's a challenge as an entrepreneur, is really understanding what's important. And I think it's really, secondly, for me, is like finding self-development, because I think we can get into the weeds as entrepreneurs and not realize that probably the 80-20 rule, 20% of the time we're probably spending really good time and 80% we're not, right? And really putting that into balances and checks, right, I think is very, very important. And I think that what made me realize the life balance was COVID. I don't know how everyone else responded. I think that like, I'm pretty good at keeping my mental health in check, or knowing when I'm getting very stressed or when I need to take a break. I felt like there was no life balance. I felt like life and work crossed over. By the third lockdown, I was struggling a bit, no questions, right? Like I was like, wow, even though there was changes in my career, that was okay. It was just like, I was struggling because I felt trapped. I'm not sure. And I really had to like dig in and go like, where's my life balance? Where can I do it? I had to go outside of nature. I started journaling, started doing some really great things, because I was going offside there for sure, right? I could feel like I was in my pajamas for 3 days. I wasn't showering, right? Like, and you didn't think, you know, I didn't even see myself going off that cliff a little bit. And I did, right? Because of it. And I was then preaching to other people how to not go there. And I went there, right? So again, caught it, you know, went in and really had to like look at that self-development. So I think finding life balance is always living authentically, but it's actually like it's okay when you're not okay, right? And talking openly about it, and then taking a check and deciding, how do I get back to that place of authentic, and understanding it and seeing it. So I think that's my best advice, because it's not always easy, right?
Yeah, I like that, being okay with not being okay, right? That's actually kind of a part of the process. And it reminds me of something, Prasanna, that you said, which is that like just having the conversation sometimes is important. And if we can kind of normalize this idea that that there's something to talk about, maybe we'll get a little bit further in terms of progress. And Prasanna, I'd like to ask you a question next. So there are lots of different ways that barriers to accessibility can show up. And I'm wondering if you could speak to some of the barriers you've encountered throughout your career, and if you'd be willing to share some advice for leaders on how to keep accessibility top of mind as they're building their teams.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I generally will like classify barriers to accessibility sort of under 4 thematic headings, or in 4 buckets. The first one is like physical barriers, so physical spaces that are inaccessible to people with disabilities. Information or communication related barriers, so barriers that prevent people from either sharing information, sharing their perspectives or views, or receiving information. The third barrier I would call systemic barriers. So these are rooted in stereotypes, also a failure to accommodate people with disabilities in the workplace. And then the fourth category of barriers would be attitudinal barriers. So this would be things like ableism, like we don't believe that you're as valuable because you're a person with a disability. We don't believe that you have anything to add because you're a person with a disability. We don't want to gather your perspective or include you on the team because we have biases that prevent us from seeing who you are as you are in the workplace and the world. So those are how I would generally classify those 4 barriers. And while I've had a rich and varied career in different industries, I faced all 4 of those barriers in my career. And I'm someone who has a relative amount of privilege in terms of my ability to navigate different spaces. And every single time I sort of navigate a new physical space or a new workplace, all of these barriers emerge, and it's generally become my responsibility to help break those barriers down. So my advice to leaders who are leading organizations, building organizations, is really, this is a shared responsibility. It's not for people with disabilities to identify the barriers and help you dismantle them. And I think the clearest way to do that is to stop treating accessibility as a feature or an add-on, but as a core design philosophy. So I'm building an organization, I'm building a product, I'm building a service. You know what? It needs to be accessible from the outset, and I need to involve people with disabilities in designing that product or offering or service or workplace or tool or benefit, so that I understand fully if what I am building serves the community that it's intended to serve. And also, you need to build this into product design. Like, it needs to be a core part of product design. It needs to be a core part of your HR processes. And if this is accessibility work and accommodations work, needs to be richly resourced. So if it's being done by one person off the side of their desk who's also doing the range of all of your culture programming, all of your HR programming, all of your benefits offerings, that is insufficient. If you truly want to be an equitable and accessible workplace, this needs to be work that is resourced, seen as work, and then there's also mechanisms for people with disabilities to provide you with feedback. So that's my advice for leaders. Clearly, I have a point of view on this.
I'm on mute again, doing the same thing again. I love what you shared, and especially this idea that partnership doesn't just happen between a person with a disability and, say, a leader who maybe is trying to think about accommodating folks, but thinking about that all the way from internal culture to what does your product look like, and how can that partnership follow all the way down the chain for everything that the company produces. Thank you for that. Amanda, thinking the right environment can really shift or make or break the experience that folks have in workplaces and cultures. And so I'm thinking about the benefits that you've seen, or if you could speak to the benefits that the Workaround provides, and any advice you might have for people who are navigating a job search right now, and the things that you might look for when evaluating potential companies as a signal that they're focused on inclusion, maybe especially from the perspective and experiences that you've had.
Prasanna's the expert. I'm like, that answer was so good. I have no advice. Mic dropped. Building space. The workaround is a container, right? It's a physical container that holds space for people to be their whole selves, and, accessibility being critical for that. And I just can't agree more that it's physical accessibility and also addressing communication and systemic and attitude accessibility, and a lot of times assumptions get made on both parts, the employee and the employer. A good example here is nursing, feeding from your body. We had initially, I started with, oh, no. We don't need a nursing room because this is the workaround and it's for babies and people will nurse wherever they want. We are comfortable. We will not put people who are feeding from their bodies into rooms, until I had this moment of like, well, wait, why am I making that choice for them? Right? That because I'm completely fine with babies feeding in any and every corner of this space doesn't mean that somebody else is. So from the job perspective, it can be really hard to suss out, is this company going to address my needs? And figuring out if you are psychologically safe to ask those questions is really hard. But looking around at the accommodations that are in place from the beginning can be really helpful. Things like getting an office tour, not that everybody's office anymore, but even in hybrid, or even if it's 100% virtual, but there was once an office, is there a nursing suite at all? Has that been an accommodation that's been made? And is it shown on every tour, or is it only shown on the tours for women identified people or those who have declared that they have children and feed from their bodies? Or does everybody get the tour? What happens with accommodations? Is it upon request, or is it for everybody? Things like flexibility. The word flexibility gets thrown around a lot. Oh, we're a flexible environment. Well, what we learned, parents in particular learned during COVID, is flexible was another word for work all night and deal with your kids during the day, eat dinner, and then log back on at night. Sure, you're flexible, but that's not the same as saying when schools are closed or in lockdown, we're going to have a no meetings rule company-wide, because parents can't attend virtual meetings when we've got kids at home. So therefore no meetings happen, because if one person can't participate, we all can't participate. And also just making sure that, the work supports you as a whole person, and that, when you're searching for a job, I think is really tough to do. So wherever you can get to colleagues, people who work there, I'm a big fan of asking for references for the boss themselves. What are you like as a boss? Do you have references? In particular, one of my favorite moves, but it's ballsy and it depends on where your level are in terms of needing that job, but to say, would you be willing to share the contact information of a relationship with a colleague you had where it didn't go well? Or a colleague who left the organization, didn't have a good experience? I'd like that conversation, if you feel safe to have it, if you think you can ask it. It doesn't have to be the worst, most explosive relationship ending thing, but I would like to know somebody who made a decision to leave because it wasn't the most parent supportive environment. And then I can make a decision about whether or not it makes sense for me here, versus the company saying, yes, we're very flexible. Yes, we support parents. Yes, we support flex time and work. And then you get there and in fact, none of those things are true. Well, that costs the company and the employee far more time. Might as well be open about what we are and are not.
Thank you for that. And you started to mention another important part of our topic for today, which is remote work. So I want to talk a little bit about this kind of new world that a lot of us find ourselves in, which is remote work or hybrid work. And so Terri, I'd like to start with you. Working from home for many people means that they're skipping maybe 20 minutes to 3 hours of commuting every day. And on the surface, this sounds awesome. We got a bunch of time back, but it also means that there's a lack of separation between home and work, which we've seen lead to overwork and burnout. And I think, Amanda, you just kind of spoke to this, right? That this flexibility means work all night. And so I'm curious, Terri, from your perspective, what are some of the ways that you've strived to maintain balance and boundaries while working remotely, and in general, while building a company?
That's good. And I kind of brought it up before, and I first want to answer it is I think that this is an era, what I call of new leadership, right? And I'm kind of talking about, because I think that's part of my responsibility, right? Is like not just myself, but building companies and what I expect. And everyone always asks me about this hybrid thing. So I kind of answer it with about leadership. I believe there's a new era and it's about looking outwards. And I believe as leaders, my responsibility is my well-being, right? Is my, empathy and my vulnerability, right? Which isn't traditionally what leaders lead, right? And so I think the social injustice is not tolerable anymore, right? It's about inclusion networks. It's about leaders serving teams, and we're all members of these teams, right? So when I'm asked this question all the time about this hybrid, do I want people back at work? I mean, I have both. I have my staff, that work in center, and I have a virtual product, right? And so I believe in flexibility. I believe that, again, I work, around leaders who think that if people are in the office, that they're not doing work, they're not productive, right? But I have a very different view. I actually think people need flexibility. Moms, women can be very more productive when we actually can have some flex time and raise our families, right? And still have careers, right? In that sense. So I believe that is about, companies looking outwards to say, this is the new trend. This is what needs to happen. People are more productive. So I actually think there is some negativity around this lines of boundaries, but I actually think that's just the growing pains of evolution, right? That we have to figure that out for ourselves where that lies. But as a company, this is the future. We need to have this hybrid, this flexibility, in our schedule. And and us as a company are moving to that way, right? Where people can it's not 9 to 5, people can decide to potentially, they've got their kids in the day, they may do a couple hours at night. It's just flex time, right? So I'm a big supporter of this virtual work, and I think there's this support of companies figuring this out along the way by respecting people, right? And understanding what will work for their people, what will work for individuals around their schedule through the day, instead of us dictating in this new era how it's going to be. If that kind of answers your question around that.
Yeah, thank you for that. And it feels complicated, right? It's kind of up to I was thinking about what Amanda said, and that when you give flexibility, then it's also up to people to figure out what that looks like for them and to set their own boundaries, and then also to interface with culture and what are the expectations that are being held in the workplace. So I appreciate the complexity of that, and also thank you for your answer. Prasanna, I would like to ask you a question about disclosing disabilities. And it seems like in remote work, there's probably more choice about when to disclose disabilities, especially if there's some visual component to them. And I'm wondering if there is more flexibility about how people disclose or when they disclose, how can companies make sure that they're creating psychological safety for folks to disclose their disabilities? And what advice might you have for someone who's struggling but is nervous to ask for the support that they need?
Oh my goodness, how much time do we have? So many thoughts on this question. I think before we even dive into what leaders can do and what advice I'd have for employees, I just want to sort of explore a bit the premise of the question around remote work. I think in many ways it has been a great equalizer. It's really created opportunities from people from different underrepresented communities to craft both the workspace they work in every day and also the life that they want to live. And work is a part of that life, but they also have other dimensions of their life. So I think remote work is that really exciting opportunity to do just that, build the life we want. But I think in many ways, remote work and its intersection with accessibility has solely focused on physical barriers to accessibility. So it's been people who have not been able to access transit now do not have to. People who did not get necessarily physical work accommodations in the workplace can now build their home workspace in a way that works for them. But I think the other barriers to accessibility haven't been really fully considered in the shift to remote work. Information and communication related barriers could emerge if people are only communicating online or through Slack or other instant messaging apps. Ableism could take root, attitudinal barriers continue to exist, stereotypes or the failure to accommodate people, those things still exist. So I think while there's been strides made in the physical accessibility space, I think remote work still poses a lot of questions around the other spaces. And as someone who is legally blind, I'll have to say that remote work has created a physical barrier for me. As someone who has difficulty seeing on screen and who benefited from in-person interactions to get away from the screen, my vision is deteriorating faster because I'm always in front of a screen. So I think just thinking about remote work and its intersection with disability raises a lot of really interesting questions, which is a long-winded way of me arriving at what can leaders do? So knowing that this is not necessarily the same experience for everyone, what can leaders do to make this an inclusive place? I think ensuring that there's company-wide accessibility training, ensuring that there's an accessibility and accommodations policy in the workplace that everyone knows how to leverage, and not just the HR team and not just the business partner, but every leader across the business. There's an understanding that people with disabilities and mental health, they need to be included in the company's diversity and inclusion strategy. That needs to be a core part of the work, and they should not be marginalized from that conversation. They also need to have like clear thinking around like internal benefits and support. So we talked a bit about that earlier. It's not just enough to have the EAP. What other programs exist? How can we ensure that they're robust and they fully accommodate? And then also just train leaders specifically on how to have these conversations. Because I think when we pivot to the last part of your question, what advice would I give to people with disabilities like myself who are seeking accommodations? The biggest fear and the biggest factor in whether someone feels a sense of belonging in the workplace is who is their manager, who is their lead, does their lead respect them? If that relationship is like on shaky ground, if that person does not create psychological safety, regardless of all the other programming that a business does, an employee is not going to feel safe to come forward. So I would say for employees pre-hire, look at the signals on a job website, look at whether there's an accessibility and accommodation statement on each job posting, make sure that you are reviewing internal reviews, ask questions of people directly as to their commitment to accessibility, and then find one person in the organization that you do trust. And it's not always your lead, it might be someone in talent, it might be a colleague, but share with them what your needs are and how best you can get the supports in place that you need. Because often I think the assumption is that we should always assume our leaders will be supportive. It's not always the case. So I encourage people to go at the pace that makes sense to them, but don't allow the trauma of being in an inaccessible workplace continue to wreak havoc on our lives. So yeah, that's it.
Beautiful. I'm so glad we have this recorded. I'm going to go watch that again and again as a good reminder. So as we're going to wrap up into a final question for all three of you in the panel here, and then we'll move into questions from the audience. There have been a lot of great tips and a lot of good advice and a lot of great experiences shared from the three of you. And something that we kind of started the talk with is that environments where action actually happens around this stuff and change occurs is particularly important. And so I'm curious from the three of you, that obviously opening the conversation is important, but the work doesn't stop here, right? And having a conversation, there's something we probably all need to do to keep this top of mind and to stay committed to making changes. And so what advice might you give us to keep this top of mind and to help move us into action and continuing to do what we need to do around these topics that we're talking about today? It's like a culmination of all of the beautiful things that you've all said, and how can we not forget and continue to make this a priority? And I'll let anyone hop in first. I'm not going to tell you who to speak, who speaks first.
I can start. I can say something. So I loved what everyone had to say. I think for us to keep it going is like how we do, at least my company, that's customer success plans for our customers, is that it's a success plan for our company, right? How do we always bring this, and how do we bring vulnerability on leadership? I think is the most important we try to put, because if we can lead with that vulnerability and talk about our own struggles or what we've done, sets the company up, right? Around that, we break down the stigma right away.
And so, Terri, you're saying that if leaders are starting the conversation and leading with their own vulnerability, then it keeps it top of mind for the whole organization and moves us forward.
Exactly.
Awesome. Thank you. Who else wants to hop in?
Yeah, I can dive in. I would say fundamentally for me, it's the demonstration of respect. And when I say respect, it really is, we need to stop with the platitudes and start with the plans. Like we need to stop telling people what we believe in and show them through our actions that this is what we stand for and what we expect everyone in the organization to commit to. And for me, that's fundamentally three things. It's resources, it's responsibility, and it's reinforcing key messages. And the resources mean that like, you are creating a team that drives this work forward, you're resourcing this work, you're making it a shared responsibility. So it's not just the job of this team you've resourced, but it's the job of everyone. I always say the ultimate measure of success for my work is that you won't need a DEI team, that everyone will so fundamentally see that this is a core part of their work that like, I will work myself out of a job. And then finally, reassurance and reinforcement. It's like, senior leadership, as Terri so powerfully said, needs to reinforce the message that this is a non-negotiable, and they need to do that through consistent messaging and concerted action.
Beautiful, thank you.
Yeah, I would echo all of that. It comes down to clear boundaries and expectation setting and role modeling. For leaders, you have to model. You know, I'm so conscious of how I show up at work for my team, for my ECEs, for the members who are here, for talking about when I need a break, when I'm having a hard time, the level of vulnerability, and understanding that when I'm vulnerable to my team, it lands differently than two colleagues sharing vulnerability, because I run this organization and there's a level of, you know, concern about their jobs and job security and we're a startup and we're a brick and mortar, just got out of 3 different lockdowns, right? If I say I'm worried, it lands different. And so to understand the ways that I can put stress on my team and then add reassurance and also clarity. It's like hailing back to my friends and local heroes like Jonathan and Melissa Nightingale from Rossignol Group, who are always talking about just clear expectations, things like unlimited vacation time, flat organizations, open door policies. Those things are not clear. And it makes it hard for those who need accommodations to take them if it's not clear that everybody else in the organization can take them, or that the culture of the organization supports time off or early dismissals and leaving to pick up for school and whatnot. So the sooner you can set very clear boundaries and expectations and for leaders to model exactly what you expect, then yeah, you shouldn't need a DEI organization, because it's how the whole organization works.
Yeah, thank you all for that. Anything that the 3 of you would want to add to this discussion before we move to audience questions? No. Beautiful. Yeah, what I heard is that, I mean, all of you mentioned leadership and the need for leadership to start the conversation and to resource folks with not only process and time and allocating dedicated people to this, but also making sure that the culture is supporting all people taking responsibility and being in partnership and making sure that everyone has equal accessibility in the way that they need. So we're going to move to audience questions here. And I am learning how to use Slido, but I think I've been told it's very simple. I'm just supposed to read the first question here. So we have a question from the audience, which is, how can I empower my teammates and colleagues when I may not know if they need some kind of accommodation? I want to be an ally, but I don't know how. And anyone who has an answer for that can go ahead and jump in.
I would say let the person with a disability lead the conversation when it comes to disclosure. I think that's very important for us to have the agency to do that. And it's not necessarily due to a lack of anything the company's doing, but it also comes with like historical and real trauma from previous organizations or experiences where you just need to have that time and trust before you self-identify. I would also say there are tangible things you can do. You can have a policy, you can have programming, you can have it communicated regularly and clearly. A tangible thing is that in every meeting invite, you include a line saying, if you have any accessibility needs or require accommodations to fully participate, this is the format of the meeting. I will be sharing a slide deck. I will be doing these things. So then people understand right away that that's really important and that they can seek the accommodations they need. So proactively messaging in a way that allows people to know that it's a safe workplace where their concerns will be like meaningfully addressed, that will make a world of difference.
Awesome, thank you for that. Anyone else have an answer for that question? No. Okay, this is the question for Amanda. And the question is, have you faced any discrimination with being an LGBTQ parent and business owner? And how does it feel to be a CEO and out with your clients and staff?
Ooh, that's personal, but fair. I mean, of course, yes. Often I come out often. You don't come out once, you feel like you have to come out all the time in different cases. And, as the founder and leader of this org, I'm always navigating like what parts of my personal life do I want to talk about, and what parts are helpful for my team in feeling supported and feeling like they can share, and what parts feel uncomfortable because, I'm leading this team and I don't necessarily want to get into, struggles with co-parenting or navigating dating as a queer business owner who's, somewhat public in how I talk about it. And I've struggled with mental health issues and I'm public about that. And, I wrote a book about my experience with postpartum depression and had the book published before I opened the Workaround. And I often talk about like wishing the book didn't exist because I made the decision to publish that memoir, which is really raw and really personal, before I ran a 13,000 square foot brick and mortar space and did a TED talk about childcare advocacy and have 8 employees who have to work, right? Like the book and all that personal stuff and my life as a queer mom in a lot of cases is independent of my work, and yet they're very deeply tied. I don't know if it answers it, but to say it's an ongoing challenge that I have to navigate in pretty much every interaction I have. Is today a day I'm going to talk about things going on in my life, or is today a day we're going to stick to business? What do my employees need today? How much do I want to share today? How much do I not want to share today? And I try to make sure that I keep boundaries on it as well. And, I have coaches and therapists and other colleagues and friends who I can bring some of my personal struggles with, or if I feel like I've had an interaction that was awful, that I don't necessarily put that on my team.
Thank you for sharing, Amanda. Thanks for jumping into a personal question. All right, the next question is, do you all have advice for someone who is struggling with self-stigma of having a disability and letting that keep them from asking for accommodations?
I do. So when I returned from parental leave, I went back to a tech startup. When I started, I was employee number 4. When I left, there were 100. I was the only parent on the team. I didn't tell anybody I'd been committed to a psychiatric ward. I didn't tell anybody I had postpartum depression. My father died by suicide when I was 4 months pregnant with my second child. I told people he had a heart attack. I really worried about what showing up at work with those things would do. And, not every disability you can hide and make those choices for. And so there was some time when I started to recognize the privilege that I had in being able to hide some of the illnesses that I had and the struggles that I had, and thought, you know, the sooner I start showing up and talking about these things, the sooner others will probably also feel that way. And also I can see my colleagues, my fellow queers and racialized and marginalized colleagues who can't make the decision to not talk about their struggles in the workplace. And so maybe I should find a way to share what I'm comfortable with in order to not put that burden on those who can't hide it. It was something that I really thought about, that I was making a decision to hide, and maybe that wasn't for the best for the whole organization. But I also quit because I was pissed off about the lack of accommodations for parents. So no, you know, at some point I was just like, I'm out. Which, if the organization's not safe and you don't feel like you should share, then you should never feel like you have to, if you have the ability not to share.
Yeah, I would just add one thing as well. I mean, that answer was so powerful. I'll be thinking about it for a while, Amanda. I also think there is a reframing that can also happen. I think for so much time, media depictions of people with disabilities, people with mental illness, or mental health related issues have always focused on the ways in which we are other in society. So a lot of the conversations we have about ourselves to ourselves are also rooted in the messages that society shares about who we are. And I think we place so much burden on what it means to self-identify or share, rightly rooted in like fears of how people will react, because those are also the only images that other people have been exposed to. The thing that has helped me over the last 15 years into stepping into the fullness of who I am and having to repeatedly do that, as Amanda shared, is thinking about what I bring to an organization. So you hired me because I have skills, experience, background, and expertise in particular areas. But I also bring, in addition to my education, credentials, and experience, I bring the dimensions of diversity that I inform and identify who I am. So I'm a person with a disability. I'm a member of the LGBTQ community. I'm a racialized person. I bring those elements of myself to my work every day, and it adds value to your organization. So I am not here placing a burden on you that you need to figure out what to do with me. You are benefiting from my presence in this space. So I say who I am is what I bring. That's what I tell myself every morning. I'm like, who I am is what I bring, whether it's my education or experience or the dimensions of my identity. That is what I'm bringing to the workplace, and I'm showing up as I am.
Who I am is what I bring. I want that like written somewhere for all of us to read every day. Thank you for sharing that. And
that was good. I had to say that was amazing. Thank you. Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question. So we've got one here that says, how do you navigate mental health struggles while working at a hypergrowth startup? Is it even something that is possible?
I can start kind of give an answer. I think with that one, I kind of answered it, brought up some things before that it's really difficult. I think in a startup, I think it's like the leadership of the startup has to really decide what's important to them, because things can get out of control really quickly because you're trying to impress your investors, trying to like meet other people's demands, and you're not then living authentically as a leader or that. So I think it's really understanding what's important in your life. And it does come down to you, right? It goes like, do I want this? Do I want it? Because in a startup, if you're taking other people's money, there is expectations, right, of what you do. And I think that's when it becomes clear about where you live in the spectrum and do you want to do it, right? And I had to come to grips with that, right? It's like, what's important to me in my life and what do I want to experience in life? How do I want to grow and how I want to contribute? Those are my three major things that I look at. And if my life aligns with that, no judgment in there to anyone, and it's okay, then you keep doing, you do what you do. And I think that's the most exercise I try to bring people through, to say, let's work through as a team, as an individual, how you want to live in this world and how you want to show up every day. And you work through those three things will answer that question for you, right? How to explain your mental health. And then you decide, because if your mental health is not doing well, don't stay in it, right? You can't. And I think that comes with inside. I mean, that people don't stay in it, right? And struggle, but it's like, it's self-development, it's well-being. I believe in as people need resiliency and tools to understand their self-development, to make choices like this in their life. That helps.
Thank you. Anyone else want to speak to this question before we wrap up?
You know, I've been there, and very quickly, it's you know, your needs and the company's needs are intertwined, but they are separate and they are exclusive. You know, they're mutually exclusive, and so you can and should, as Terri said, like, get the help you need and prioritize that, because you know that has to come first wherever you can. And you know, whether it's a slow as molasses organization or a hyperdrive startup, you are bringing value to that organization. And in order to bring your best self, you've got to take care of yourself when you're sick. And that's it, you're sick. You break your arm, you got to go get a cast. You know, you need treatment, but you can't perform at your best if you need some help. And that's not forever. And there are ways to get better, right? And so getting the help so that you can get back on the rocket ship if it's growing fast is part of it, and recognize where the company and their expectations could be contributing to some of that stress, and knowing that you are detached from that and it doesn't define you.
Thank you all so much. This was a really touching and also inspiring conversation for me. I hope it was for the folks in the audience as well. Super appreciate all of your time and your wisdom, and also your vulnerability in sharing who you are here in this space and modeling that for us. And Shelby, do you want to say something before we wrap up here?
I've taken Shelby's power away, so she can't. With that, I will wrap us up. Thank you so much to everyone. Thank you, Kari. Thank you, Terri, Amanda, and Prasanna. We really appreciate you. And with that, thank you, everyone watching. We will see you at the next one. Bye.
Take good care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.